meditation should I introduce to you? And in the teachings of the Buddhist teachings on emptiness and Pratik, we have a meditation, a series of meditations called Analytical meditation. Does that sound attractive? You see, some people do think it sounds attractive. Most people get turned off by the term analytical meditation, and often people say that they come to meditation and spirituality to put away the intellect. But this is I just wanted to, before I begin, to introduce what is meant by analytical meditation, because if you look at the word analysis, the Greek root means to loosen and open up something. So in a way, this is actually a way of looking into fixed concepts we have about something, words and labels we have about something, and opening it up and loosening our fixed concepts that we have about things. So it's actually people who have really strong, kind of stuck in their intellect have trouble with this kind of analysis. So there's no need to be intimidated or, really keep an open mind toward what it means to look very deeply in a very nuanced way into experience and have a direct experience. Hi. Someone I know. So I often call this what I'm going to introduce now, because we're not going straight into an analytical meditation, but what I call prepping the lab. So as if, we're going to do a kind of observing of our own mind, like a scientific experiment, but it's like a first-person science. Because often in scientific experiments, we prep the lab and then we kind of distance ourselves from the experiment. But here we look at our own mind, our own experience, what it is to perceive, what our conceptual mind is. We become curious about it. And the whole point for me in this meditation is it possible to look at our experience without having to reach a conclusion, a definitive conclusion about what we experience? Because how we look at meditation is really of the utmost importance and really will determine what we see. Like, what is the mind? How do we poise our mind for some insight into the nature of reality? What quality is that? What qualities did that kind of mind have? So there was a great scientist, Francesco Varela, and he was a neuroscientist, and he talked about first-person science. So this reminds me of him, and I call this prepping the mind, prepping the lab. So all you have to do, I'll lead you through the whole thing, you just relax, and sometimes I just think, why not close your eyes and just enjoy it, and I'll just guide you through it. And really, all you have to do is listen and let your mind kind of free and loose and explore your own experience in a very natural, relaxed way. So let's just begin by just watching our breath, breathing in a few breaths. So as we inhale, you can inhale through your mouth, through your nose, whatever is comfortable for you. With your posture, relaxed but with some integrity to it, so the energy can really move. So breathe in and feel the air coming through your nostrils or through your mouth, filling up your lungs, expanding your lungs, and then usually there's a very small gap between the inhale and the exhale, and then breathing a long out breath, and again another kind of space or gap, another inhale. Just do a few of those.
I wonder if the microphone is on.
Hold it. Do you want me to hold it a little closer? How's that? Sounds a little louder now. I can hold it for now, I think.
Yeah, maybe you just position it how it's comfortable, and I'll work out the piece.
How's this, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll talk a little bit louder too. Then bring your awareness, your attention to the top of your head. Let's start there. We'll utilize our body for this. It's very interesting to notice, you know, when I say bring your awareness to the top of your head, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because we have an agreement, a language agreement where that is. And we're able to kind of visualize and feel the top of our head. So put your awareness there, and you might notice wherever you place your awareness, it comes alive with sensation often. So let yourself just experience the sensation on the top of your head, for example. You might even feel, if you're sensitive, it almost feels like the hairs are growing out of your head. You might feel some tingling or the cold air on your skin. And just notice what's there. There's no bad or good experience. There's no judging experience here. Just appreciating that we have the ability to communicate. We have the sensory experiences. We have this body. And the body really comes alive. There's so much sensation in the body, especially when you pay attention to a particular area. Then you can bring your awareness, you know, down your face. And you might notice as you do that, you might feel some tingling or itching or some kind of numb areas. Sometimes numbness is very interesting because actually there's a lot of sensation in numbness. Just let yourself explore. This is just an exploration, like if you're looking through a telescope at the planets in a space. Just noticing practice. It's interesting, the face has most of our sensory organs are in our face. Our eyes and our ears and sense of smell, our tongue. Notice also the sensations, like if you want to put your attention on a particular sensation, like if you have a tingling or an itching, see if it changes or if it's static. See if you could actually kind of catch it or locate it. When you look at it, does it open up into more sensations? Or is it really something singular there you can actually point to or locate? You might also, you know, sometimes there's areas of your body that speak to you because of blocked energy or stronger sensations, so you can notice that. Just let yourself kind of move around and feel your body, your face. You can let the awareness go down the back of your head, too. When you're doing this exercise, you might think we're just focusing on the body, but actually we're using our conceptual mind. We're using our visual sense, although it's more our imagination because our eyes might be closed. But you can see your face or where your attention is in your mind's eye in a kind of interesting way. When you look at the visual of that, see if it's like a static vision or does it keep changing? Think of your face. Does your vision that you have in your imagination, or what you're seeing visually in your mind, is it a static thing? Is it a singular thing? Or is it changing all the time? And when you're ready, you can bring your awareness down your neck, and the front and back of your neck. There are places where you're kind of contracted. Notice that. Maybe you can relax that area. Usually when you relax it, just opens up into more different kinds of sensation. Or if you feel some kind of discomfort, put your attention on that area and see, can you find a boundary to that? Where does that start? Or is it kind of amorphous? Does it kind of elude you? Is it kind of misty? Just again observing with no judgment, just interest and curiosity, and it's like a universe unto itself, your body and your mind. focus down your shoulders, down your arms, into your fingers. Notice a lot of sensation maybe on the palms of your hands. You can feel the cold air and the warm air on your skin. Notice too how our body is something we only know through our own awareness of it. It's very difficult or impossible really to separate the body and the mind, the body and our experience of our sensations, the conceptual mind and the body. All these things, we don't have to reject any of it. These are our incredibly rich resources, human or sentient resources that we have for feeling the world around us. Feeling pleasure and pain. And when we look into pleasure and pain, we might find that they're not exactly as we think they are. For example, you might look into a itchy sensation or a tight sensation, and you might find that it opens up into more sensation. So when you feel ready, you can also then begin to move your awareness down the front of your body, or down your back, the trunk of your body. Your organs are in there working without you even having to think about it. It's a very rich situation. Amazing. Again, you might feel some tightness in your chest. Look into that and see what happens to it. Can you find the boundary of that sensation? Is that a singular thing, like something whole, or is it made up of smaller many sensations? And do these keep changing, or are they static? Really look. And we're understanding mind in its world this way, just through direct observation. And this is first-person science. You might feel your stomach rumbling, just put your attention there. So much movement in the body. And just as you observe the body, the mind is moving with it. Mind and the physical form and the physical sensations are all working together. What's inner and what's outer are very hard to separate. And sometimes thoughts will arise. Thoughts probably will continue to arise, and thoughts are not a problem, but just an expression of the nature of cause and effect, interdependence. No need to judge them. They're like the sensations in your body. If you really look at the quality of the thought, you might not find anything singular there. You might not find anything permanent there, but you need to look to make sure that's the case. Sometimes this is called a looking and not finding practice, because you look for a singular thought, something that's whole and doesn't change. Can you find that? So then when you feel ready, you can bring your awareness down your legs, over your knees, down your calves, into your feet, your toes. You can feel the weight of your body on the ground. Really notice that. This is all about having a direct experience. Your foot might be asleep if your legs are crossed, or You might feel tingling sensation, again, some numbness. Maybe your foot is starting to wake up. You know, just notice. Is there something singular or permanent there? Is there something there that's kind of independent or autonomous, that's separate from the air that you're breathing and the temperature and, you know, the thoughts that you're thinking, and the whole system seems to be working together. Again, inner and outer can't be separated. But again, you should see for yourself. This is about developing some kind of confidence in the way that your experience is, the nature of experience. I think too it's all about appreciating the fact that we have these incredible resources that make us alive. And I think when we observe in a much more nuanced way our experience, we do come to life in a different kind of way. And we understand ourselves in a different way. We also can see, you know, when thoughts arise, we always think of thoughts as inner activities, the activity of the mind, but thoughts often seem like they're coming at us from the outside. So again, notice inner and outer. What's inner, what's outer, it's hard to say. So let's bring our mind back to our breath, our attention to the breath. And again, focus on the inhale. Let the lungs fill, expand with air, and then a gap. And then again, breathing out. Emptying the chest with air, and then another gap. When the mind wanders, just bring it right back to the breath. Very simple. And just, you don't have to feel upset with yourself if your mind wanders, because somehow prajna, your discerning intelligence, reminded you to bring it back. So you can rejoice in that. When it wanders again, just bring it right back. So I thought we could begin tonight by generating bodhicitta, or often in the Mahayana, we always actually, in Mahayana Buddhism, or in the tradition of bodhicitta, we always generate the vow, and it's phrased in many different ways in different traditions. So one of the ways that I enjoyed to talk about it, because I think it's a very provocative vow actually. Beings are limitless, so their suffering is limitless. I vow to free them all. And I find, well, this is an interesting aspiration to make, because from the get-go, it's not an achievable commitment. I've thought about this a lot in my life. What does this mean to me? So what it's meant to me is that if beings are limitless and suffering is limitless, then I have to become limitless to embrace all beings into the realm of the love and care I usually reserve only for myself. So I think this commitment has to do with being big enough to accommodate not just the suffering of others, but one's own life, you know, kind of the pain and glory of life and one's existence. So in a sense, we're moving away from I am suffering to there is suffering, and we're making the world our body. And of course that never ends. It's an infinite, a commitment to infinitely include the suffering of limitless beings. So the great Bodhisattva Shantideva said that in his book, The Way of the Bodhisattva, or the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, he used the analogy of, you know, we have a trunk of our body, and then the limbs, you know, come out from the trunk. So, you know, if we stub our toe, we often, you know, reach out to kind of soothe our toe or bandage our toe. In that way, we need to consider sentient beings, all conscious creatures, as extensions of our own self. And I like this way of looking at it, because we're always trying to figure out what to do with our ego or our self. But what Shantideva is saying here is you don't have to get rid of the ego or self at all. All you have to do is make it big enough to include everyone else inside. So it takes care of a lot of problems. So anyways, I wanted to just remind us all of why we're practicing. And you know, they say that Manjushri, the great Bodhisattva Manjushri, took the vow to not attain enlightenment until all beings were enlightened, which means, you know, basically he's vowing to never attain enlightenment. But incidentally, I think he did, because he was burning with love that much. So, you know, I think for the Bodhisattva, the biggest fear is that one is living in a state of peace while everyone else is suffering. So we always have a fear, as sentient beings, we often fear suffering, but here, in this tradition, there's this fear of not being able to experience suffering, or not being connected to the suffering of others. So there's something about this that's extremely important in our awakening, and we need others to wake up. Hence, we have this beautiful path. So Chandra was, as I was saying, telling me that you've been studying the absolute bodhicitta, which has to do with this idea. In a way, it's very connected to this vow, because there's this kind of quality of infinite, unfixable nature of things. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this has to do with emptiness. And I don't mean that things are unfixable because they're broken. It's just that there's the life that we live in, the kind of dynamic nature of relationships and contingent relationships, is just always moving and lively and can't be captured, and is very rambunctious, you know, and it resists definition. It doesn't lend itself to being fixed because it's too lively. And that has something to do with emptiness. And let me try to explain this to you. as best I can. So when we talk about emptiness, we're really talking about, well, let's not start with emptiness. Let's start with something else. Let's find our way into emptiness through something else, and that's really what I want to do. So on the dawn of the Buddha's awakening, under the Bodhi tree, he said something curious. He said, and I'll explain this afterwards, he said, this being, B-E-I-N-G, this being, that becomes. From the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that becomes not. From the cessation of this, that ceases. This sounds a bit cryptic or mysterious, but actually, and people heard it in many different ways. Hence, we have many different paths. But it lies at the very essence of his awakening. So it's important that we take a look at what this means to us. So in a way, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, what it's saying is, if the causes and conditions for suffering are there, suffering will arise. If those causes and conditions cease, then suffering will cease. You know, if the conditions for happiness and freedom are there, freedom will arise. So, you know, we could be talking about the Four Noble Truths here, and a lot of people interpret that as meaning the Four Noble, you know, being connected to the Four Noble Truths. But it also is understood in a general way. And in the sutras, the Buddha talked about two, described or illustrated in words, two bundles of reeds leaning up against each other. So what that means is if this one falls, then I'm asking you, the other one falls. Yeah, if they're leaning, if this one falls, the other one falls. Yeah, so he called this principle Pratichet Samutpada. That's a Sanskrit word, Pratichet Samutpada. So it's often translated as dependent arising or dependent origination. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. Joanna Macy calls it mutual causality. I really like that one because when we're talking about everything is leaning, that's what I call it. How I describe it sometimes is that everything is leaning up, everything is influencing and interrupting and kind of bumping up against each other, and that's why there's so much movement. So in the Buddhist path, we never talk about like a creator, a singular creator that creates the universe. When we talk about how creation happens, it's happening all the time because everything is leaning. Another way to talk about it is, it all depends. It all depends. So I'm going to start by illustrating this with my sticks, because I find this is a really effective way of understanding something which is actually a really simple idea. Very natural, very easy to understand. And I love it because everywhere I go, I find very different kinds of sticks from the indigenous trees of the area. My friends found these for me on the beach. And don't get distracted by this very cool pine cone. I thought that was neat, but it has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about. But I somehow couldn't get myself not to use this one. So I'm going to ask you a question. So I really need you all to help me open up this inquiry. So blurt it out. You know, don't hold back, because I can't do this alone. So what would you say about this stick in terms of its length? Is this a long stick or a short stick? Medium? Long? Long? What's that?
It depends.
What did you say too? I heard him say something interesting. Anyway.
Short or long compared, like
in
perception is?
Yeah. Okay. Just yell it out. Anybody else? Medium? So we didn't even have any short. People say short. Okay. That's fine. That's great. Perfect answers or perfect responses to the question. Okay. So now I'm holding this stick, and again, don't get distracted by the pine cone. What happens when I hold this stick next to this stick?
bottom stick becomes longer.
Yeah, the bottom stick is longer in relationship or independence upon this stick. Yeah. It's all about relationship. Now, what happens when I hold this stick up? Yeah. Well, in a way, you're right. But it's only medium in relationship. It's still the same thing. It's medium in relationship to the two other sticks. But in relation to this one stick, it's short. So this stick has been both long, medium, and short in the course of like a minute. Right? So let me ask you some more questions about this stick. We'll put these down for now. What about the utility or function of the stick, or like the meaning of this stick? What could you use this stick for? What's that? What's he saying?
Teaching about emptiness.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, I say it's about Mahayana pointing out instructions, like pointing instructions. Or you could say this whole exercise, the purpose of the stick is to poke a little hole in your delusion. What else could we use? Start a fire. Use it for fuel to burn. Dig a hole. What's that? Tent pole. It could be a tent pole for like a chipmunk. We couldn't fit. Fishing. You could tie a line to it. Boy, these people are creative tonight. Stir a pot of soup. A little boy's sword. My son was always carrying a stick. Does yours? Yeah. So there's so many things. So let me ask you this then. Does the length or the function of the stick exist in the stick itself? No. Zach says no. Really think about it. Does it exist in the stick itself?
No perception.
Yeah, it depends on the relationship. And it does depend on your perception. It depends on what you decide to utilize it for. So that's a relationship too. So it all depends, right? We all agree on that, right? Is there anybody who doesn't agree on that? Yeah. To me, this is a really mind-blowing thing. Because we look around at the world and we think qualities exist in the object. We think when somebody does something that hurts our feelings, they're the one that the quality of not niceness exists in the object. And we hold them to that. So let me ask you now something else. Let's get back to length. Is length, because even though the length does not exist in the stick itself, do you think length has a strong function and the size and measurement of something has a strong function in the way we live our life?
Very much.
Very much. I think so too. Do you think so? Okay, tell me why measurement is important.
Keeping time.
Keeping time. That's measuring like the moments or the kind of continuum of an experience. Or, using time as a way to participate in life together, like we couldn't be here doing this together if we didn't have time. Right? What about the streets and the measurement miles and how many gallons of gas we put into our car and, how, I don't know, the GPS tells us how to get here, and that's all based on measurement, isn't it? Imagine a world without measurement. Like this how can we build this without the building without measurement? So in fact, if you really think about it, this is it might not be a truth, but it has a very, very powerful function in the way we communicate with each other and participate in the world. And the reason I want to stress this really strongly is because people have this very strong feeling that if there's no intrinsic characteristics that exist in the stick itself, it must mean that nothing matters or nothing functions. But do you see that to be true? No. Try to stop the expression of experience that arises from this kind of commingling of relationships. You know, we're all here because of infinite causes and conditions that we can't even see. You know, we can look at gross ones like we knew who our parents were. We know who our parents are. And we know how that all came about. And we knew, you know, we've seen ourselves grow up and mature, and we know we have to eat to survive, and, you know, we need to breathe air and, you know, learn how to live in the world and so on. These are all causes and conditions. But there's really, really subtle ones too. We can't see everything. But this is happening. So what I want to say is this term emptiness, when we say emptiness, it means that we can't, this stick is empty of measurement, it's empty of meaning, it's empty of any kind of intrinsic truth about what it is for, because it all depends. It all depends on how you see it. So emptiness doesn't mean void, it just means that you can't really find any solid or singular or independent thing.
What isn't it intrinsically woodiness?
Well, what is woodiness in a way? Woodiness is, yeah, well, that's a very, so when we're using language, no, this is great that you said that, woodiness. Actually, I myself never thought about woodiness before, but now that you mention it, that's a really great way to describe, you know, what I understand. And wood and woodiness is something that we can understand because we have language agreements. I don't think a bug would see this as woodiness. He'd probably, you know, probably has a whole different way of perceiving reality, but sees it much more as something to burrow into, you know. So, you know, and the idea of wood, or what wood is used for, or what wood is very much a conceptual agreement. We have to talk about something that we're experiencing right now. So we do have language agreements, although the way we all see what we consider to be one object is always different. Like, we're all here talking about something, but I can promise you that everybody's having a different experience. If you really think about it, if you really we start to talk to each other, I mean, you've already shouted out many different things. And we come from a whole different history, and the way we are is very unique and changing and always influenced by what's happening in our world. So your woodiness, you know, I don't know, this tree also used to be, you know, this branch used to come from a tree and was very much alive, and at some point will crumble, and it's not really a singular thing, but you could say woodiness, and we all understand it, which is very magical in a certain way, isn't it? Like, we all know what you mean.
But we're saying it's intrinsic in that object.
No, we're not saying that. No. We're saying it's not intrinsic in the object. Yeah. It's coming, the idea of woodiness is coming because of your particular relationship in encountering the object. So what is this?
Later it could be dirt.
It will be dirt, probably. Yeah, or part of the dirt, or yeah, it will crumble and it will disintegrate like everything else. It will continue to change. So is there anybody who could actually verify what this is? The truth of the object?
What if you just say that's matter?
Well, is it just matter?
It's just
And
existence.
It's energy.
It's someone might say it's energy.
And matter is a word that we ascribe.
Yeah, it's again like woodiness. Yeah, like from a scientific point of view, yeah, scientists would see this very differently. We're all looking at it in a different way. So who's to verify what this is? Who could possibly verify the truth of the stick? And this is what's interesting to me about this, is that this exercise shows me that you can't be right. And I love that. So from what this means, what this does to me is make me look at my own fundamentalism. Because I tend, like I think most people, to look out at the world and think I know what it is, and think that what I see is the truth of the object. And what this does is tell me that the object is not one-dimensional or singular or permanent, and it's not autonomous. It can't be autonomous because we're all here looking at it and having a very different experience. And in science, I don't know, but they say, that, like in the Heisenberg experiment, like the way that you look at something changes it, too. So what exactly is it? We can't exactly say. It becomes, instead of one-dimensional, it becomes open-dimensional. And by the way, open dimensionality is one translator's translation of the term emptiness. Herbert Gunther. Open dimensionality, which I think is a beautiful description of emptiness.
Yeah.
Because you can't say what it is, but you can't really deny, you know. And you can't really say it is full, but you know, we use the term emptiness, but it's empty of. It's empty of being something singular. It's empty of being something permanent or static, and it's empty of being autonomous. Because it's part of the great nature of infinite contingency. We are a part of the great nature of infinite contingency. So this idea of, so when we talk about pratityasamutpada or interdependence, it's the way to open up into understanding emptiness. That's its purpose. And when the Buddha taught emptiness, you know, he taught this being, that becomes, but for a while, the kind of teachings on emptiness dissipated in the world. And there was a lot more emphasis on vows and precepts and conduct. But then in the 2nd century, there was a great master named Nagarjuna. And he kind of revived the teachings on interdependence. And he talked about exploring this idea of singularity and the idea of permanence and the idea of autonomous. If something could be autonomous, or when I say autonomous, like independent or not influenced by causes and conditions. And he asked us to look and see if we could find a singular thing, a permanent thing, or an autonomous or independent thing. And so, you know, what we were doing, the meditation before, is this kind of the prep for this kind of searching and looking very directly into our own experience to see if we can find something singular, permanent, or autonomous. So let me just give you an idea of what something like that would look like, and then maybe we can just have some discourse a little bit. So, for example, looking for a singular thing would be, you know, we have this tendency to singularize everything through language. Like language does that for us. It's like a map or an abstract of what we see. You know, we call this a stick or an iPhone, or, you know, a conglomeration of things like a swarm of bees. We nominalize it. We give it a name. So it's like mapping things. And there's no problem with language. Language is amazing. As long as we know that what we call something is not, the thing itself is not limited to what we call it. So we can see that somebody is in a bad mood, but people are not singular things. You know, people have constant moving perceptions and thoughts, and our physical bodies are changing all the time. And, you know, if somebody were to see you as singular, would you like it? It's not respectful. Like I always say, the greatest respect you can have for anyone is not to think you know who they are. Because we're all part of this great nature of dependent origination. So we tend to see in maps. So I often use this analogy of, you know, if you're going to go to a trailhead to go for a hike, you might bring a map so you don't get lost. And when you get to the trailhead, you take out the map and you look at the map, and then you look at the trailhead and you see that the map looks nothing like the trailhead. It's an abstract. It's a one-dimensional, flat, you know, thing. So you start to walk up the trailhead and you see, like, there's rocks and sand and there's bees and maybe there's mosquitoes flying around, and you smell the air and you feel the breeze on your face, and you find shortcuts and different surprising things everywhere that you look. And you realize, wow, you know, this is a very lively situation. It's nothing like the map. And then you might walk up to a tree and you might realize that actually the term tree is a map for more territory. So the map is not the territory. And when we're looking at, the body and the self and our mind and our sensations, we're seeing that what we call I, or the body, is just a map. And then you walk the territory. So when we're doing the meditation, we're walking the territory of our experience, of what we think of as a self, and we find, no, it's not singular at all. So a tree is not singular at all. It has branches and pine needles and maybe a pine cone, So the tree is a map for the territory of all these spectacular parts. It's not singular, permanent, or autonomous at all. And then we might go down to the pine cone and we take that apart. So this is the kind of analysis I'm talking about. It's very simple. It's very natural. We start to take the pine cone apart and we see that it has petals and like these wooden petals and fibers and seeds. And you can break it down to, say, an atom. Atom means, in Greek, unbreakable. But in fact, we did break it open in the 1950s, and a million things came out, like gluons and protons and strings and quarks. Like as many things as you could possibly imagine can come out of an atom. Which one of them is true, we cannot say. But the point is, as long as you have a thing, a map, it can be opened. And what's interesting about all of this is that, this idea of singular is just the conceptual mind's ability to be a part of, what's language and communication and understanding. And it's not a problem at all. Mapping is very important. Even grouping things together, like skandhas, or, here are the people that need help. Here are the people that can help. That's very helpful. But it's not... we can't say that it's important to understand that even when we group or we map, that the thing itself is not limited to these labels that we have about it. As long as we understand that, then we're okay. So this is very interesting to me. It's like, when you go in today, I did an interview, and we started with the title of my book. And then it's like you open it up, and it just keeps opening, and it never really stops. This is how the mind is. It will continue to open. You never really reach any definitive conclusion about anything. I always ask myself, because it's so rich, it's so lively, the question is, can you bear it? Can you bear not closing down around that much life, that much richness or creative expression, Yeah, Jennifer, did you have?
So what's enlightenment then in this context if there's no place to reach?
Yeah, that's a very fabulous question. And I can't say what enlightenment, actually enlightenment is something that also is not a thing. And so as you continue to explore it, it will keep opening and opening. But I will say one thing about just my experience with my teacher Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And my experience with the great teachers that I meet and hear about, but this in particular with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, I was very young when I met him, and I was always expecting when I went to see him, meet him for the first time, that he'd be like somebody who knew the answers to everything. But in fact, when I entered the room, what struck me the most was that he was in a constant state of wonder, awe, the ability to bear the fathomless nature of infinite contingency. And when I met him and I saw that, I thought, this is where the spiritual path leads. This is how I could, the idea of being so open and so able to experience that much life. To me, that's how I understood his wakefulness and his kind of infinite kindness and compassion. So, enlightenment is not a place that you reach. It's not a destination. It's not a thing. It's this ability to bear that much suffering, that much joy, that much life. And it just continues, to open in that way. I think maybe that's how that's just my way of trying to explain what I understand this to be. Yeah.
And
Chandra.
ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying your book.
Oh,
And
thank
it's
you.
really accessible and fun and brings a topic of emptiness and interdependence that I've loved for so many years, really down to earth in an
That's good.
integral way. So I really suggest people who are interested in these core teachings of Buddhism to get this book, and they're selling it here tonight, and reading it because it's really helpful. And I would love to have two things I'd like to ask. I hope you can hear me okay, yeah?
Do you want to use this?
No, I think it's okay if I speak up because I'm going to volley the ball right back to you in a moment. There's this one quotation that you cite in your book on page 39, another quote by Shantideva, or teaching by Shantideva from The Way of the Bodhisattva. You quote him by saying, "The intention of analytical investigation," or this type of analytical meditation, right, that we did, "is not to refute sight, sound, or knowing.
Yeah.
Our aim is the reverse. Our aim is to reverse the cause of suffering, clinging to things as real." This is really interesting to me because, of course, that's the core teaching of the Buddha, that we suffer. Why? Because we are ignorant of our true nature, and because of that ignorance, we cling, we crave, we grasp onto ego, onto external stimuli. And this is what we're working on. For those of you who've been coming to my classes, also we're working on this with the Feeding Your Demons study. Does this practice of feeding your demons reduce your experience of craving, whether it's onto behaviors or substances, and so on. So this is really the crux. And so I would love to hear you talk about the healing power of this analytical meditation. And then what was the other part? The other part was, and then how does it lead to faith? The confidence and faith. So,
Sure. I'm happy to try to respond to that. So this word real is a tough one because we don't usually walk around in our life thinking, is this real? Is that not real? It's such a complex thing to enter into in that way. It's like, we sometimes feel things are real because they're vivid, or sometimes we think things are real because they're concrete. So what about like music or bubbles or something? Are those real? I ask myself all these questions, so, and also we have intense emotions. They feel very real. So how I've been talking to myself about this is actually real being a process that we engage in, reification. Like, it has to do with how we misapprehend an object by reifying it. So when we look at someone as singular, or we look at emotion like we have a craving, and the craving we see it as, how Nagarjuna talked about reification is we see it as something singular, we see it as something permanent, and we see it as like autonomous. So it seems like we're doomed. We do not see that it arises based on infinite causes and conditions. It's continuing to move, and it dissolves. It's very, our minds get very gross and they move very quickly. Like when I was little, my mom got me one of those carousels. It's like this thing that spins, and then it had like this movie strip, but like frames of a movie, and then you put that inside and you spin it. And the faster it spins, the more real it starts to look. Like something's really happening. So I think we look at the world in a very gross way. We don't look at things in a nuanced way, in a sensitive way, in terms of relationship. So the whole point of the sticks is kind of to pry open this kind of coarse way in which we look at things. So something arises and all of a sudden we feel doomed and we feel like something is happening to us. And we don't realize that it's arising due to relationships, and it begins to move very quickly and we begin to react to it. And there's this feeling of rightness, actually, even with addiction or craving or anger. And I'll give you a couple examples maybe that's helpful. like for example, all the negative emotions, they say, arises from reification. So, for example, when men are trained to go to war, or women, they're trained to objectify the enemy. So if they were to go into a war zone and realize, oh, this other person on the other side is like a father or a husband or a son, and look into their eyes, it would be hard to evoke a lot of aggression. And the same with like a craving. We sometimes crave objects, so therefore, you know, in advertising they understand this, and so they kind of show you the object, all the good parts of the object, but they don't remind you that it will break down, that it will, you know, need to be fixed, it's not permanent, that it will, you know, cause you a lot of trouble too. So if you understand that things, if you see things in an open dimensional way, it will relax your craving. So you still might purchase the object, but with a much more savvy understanding of its nature, of its interdependence. So what it's saying is that when we kind of see realistically, like I think that, you know, we talk about the nature of reality here, but it's actually about seeing things realistically. Like, what is their nature? How can we, like, we can't respond to life well if we don't understand what we're really dealing with. So I feel the Buddha is just asking us to look at life realistically. Like, there is suffering, because everything's leaning, everything's moving, and we have preferences. So we're going to experience suffering because of that. Because of the kind of dynamic nature of dependent arising. Yeah.
And then faith.
Okay, and then faith. She asked some really hard questions. So, okay, so faith. Where do I begin with faith?
What is faith? Like, I know it's a
Yeah,
big
it's a
question.
good. No, it's a good
But
question.
in
though.
Buddhism, it's a big deal. And I like your book and how you talk about it, because I had similar feelings when I first started getting into
Oh,
Dharma.
did
It's
you?
like, I don't have that kind of faith they're talking about. And
Yeah.
I lived in Dharamsala where Tibetans were bowing everywhere and had so much faith to the
Yeah.
statues and the lamas. And I was like, I want that. But I wasn't raised with that, so I had
Yeah.
to find my way to it. And I still grapple with faith a little bit. So I would love for you to talk about that.
I'm happy
In terms
to
of
talk about it.
interdependence and how that can
Yeah.
give rise to an authentic feeling of
Yeah.
confidence or faith.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I was little, I had a lot of experiences of bigger experiences, like I think most people do, like feeling of being resolved and connected to the world around me. And I think that's a natural human experience. Is it for you? Sometimes.
Resolved?
Just feeling at ease, feeling connected, even if just in little moments. Do you have that? You have? Everybody knows, right?
Or even as a child.
As a child,
memories
yeah.
of that.
Yeah. It's always so heartening to me because it seems like everybody has that. So I think that's, we experience that by virtue of being alive. So it's a wonderful, like even by default, we're bound to experience that here and there. Like when we go out in nature or listen to a piece of music. So I felt as a young person that I had a lot of faith in that experience. And I trusted that the most. And so I always pursued that throughout my life. And so it's probably why, you know, I pursue the Dharma and so forth. And I think a lot of people are curious about that. And I was always also curious about why I didn't have that. And why I felt uncomfortable. And why sometimes this deep feeling of connectedness didn't arise in me. And why I doubted things sometimes. And why I mistrusted things. So there was that too. And then as I entered the path, like you were saying, Chandra, like there were certain passages, like it said, you should have faith. You know, even in the Buddha Dharma, the way something was translated, it really rubbed me the wrong way. At the same time, I started to adapt these kinds of shoulds and shouldn'ts in my own mind. Like, I should be feeling this way. Or, you know, I'm married to my teacher, and like why sometimes devotion didn't arise, you know, when something irritating came up in the marriage, you know. So that was kind of bothering me profoundly. Like, how do you reconcile your own discernment and also your own just human stuff with faith, you know? So I got very curious about that, and I started to explore it more. And at first I looked in the dictionary and looked up the definition of faith in the Oxford English Dictionary, and it said, you know, doctrine, dogma, religion. Of course, religion really means reconnect, if you look that up, the root of religion. But, you know, we have feelings of like all these heavy shouldn'ts, like if you don't believe in God, you're going to go to hell, or, you know, or if you're a person of faith, you're naive. Like there's that too. And so a lot of us have discomfort around this kind of shoulds and shouldn'ts. But also in the dictionary, I saw confidence, conviction, you know, spiritual awakening. So that was interesting to me just right there. And I think words aren't determinate structures. You know, they change over time and mean different things in different contexts. You know, just like we've been talking about, it all depends, you know. So I started digging more, and I've started kind of wanting to teach about faith and talk to other people about faith. And of course, people were very resistant. So I started to call it the F word. And then people got interested, they started to come. But what I started to think about in myself was that how can you live in the world without faith? Because everything leans. It all depends. Like I was saying last night when I was talking, Chinli Nobu Rinpoche said, cows have faith in grass. And I think that's a really profound statement. Because if we're dependent, then we have no choice but to faith. So for me, like, faith is a human question. What does faith mean in the context of the human condition? You know? And so I became interested. And this led me to look into the nature of a dependent arising. And I realized, like, faith was not something I had or I didn't have, but it's something that I do. And it means I find my way as a part of the great nature of infinite contingency. How can I be in relationship? How can I find grace in relationship? Because grace doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in the way we are in relation to the world around us, like finding a sane way of being. So I started to call that faithing, because I think it's something that you engage, you know, in that way. And that's, anyways, you know, the book is my whole inquiry, and I'm trying to bring people through that inquiry in a very personal way. It's kind of a book that demands you to participate a little bit, like with the sticks, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I brought, the logic is kind of looking at the nature of dependent arising kind of as the method to open up this kind of conundrum in a way I was having around faith. Because in a way I think I had a lot of faith, and in another way I felt uncomfortable with the word faith. And I have a lot of questions, and I feel in the Dharma that we should really honor our own discerning intelligence. That the Dharma is never asking us just to believe. And that we have a lot of trouble when we believe something to be true. You know, beliefs is this kind of rightness, even if it's a negative belief, like we have a negative belief about ourselves, like we're failing, we're a failure, or we're doomed, or we're stuck in a dark place and we can't get out of it. Those are beliefs too, because we're not singular, we're not permanent, you know, we're not independent of causes and conditions. That means we're not doomed. You know, we're not doomed. It is a really good, yeah, it's a hopeful thing. So, you know, this kind of, we need to be able to examine doubt, because once we have a belief, like we have a belief in the church until somebody does something that makes us, that's not very holy, for example, you know, then we fall into doubt. So there's like this belief, as long as you hold on to beliefs and truths, you're vulnerable to doubt. And I thought, how can I find a system, or that's not a healthy system. That's what I felt. I don't feel that Buddhism is asking you to believe in anything as a truth. Even the path or the nature of emptiness is not to be seen as a truth, but a way to understand something. So Nagarjuna said, be careful not to cling to the idea of emptiness. Emptiness is not meant to be an idea. It's just a way to open up our understanding. So this is like a dogma-free, it's an inquiry. It's a process. It's a great joy to discover in your life and to look at something. And in this book, one of the things I really wanted to explore was doubt, because I have such an interest in doubt. And I've had a lot of doubt in my life. And my friend said, you know, it takes a lot of faith to explore doubt. Because when you start to explore your belief systems and your doubts, you could give up your path altogether. So that forced me to really see where I was being a fundamentalist, like where I thought I was right, and where I thought maybe my doubts were right. Belief and doubt are really, really the worst impediments to our spiritual path. I mean, it's okay to have them, but to believe them is a problem. So I have in the book, Mother Teresa, you know, at the end of her life, she had a lot of darkness and doubt. And she was you think of her as like the beacon of she had so much faith in God. And she said God wasn't showing his or whatever face to her, you know. And I thought, well, maybe she has an idea of what God should look like, because she was holding on to some beliefs. This, you know, I don't know really what happened, but this became like an inquiry for me, because I had that. I have some beliefs of what a practitioner should look like, or what I want my life to look at, or what, you know, I don't want to be like, or what I think the world is like, you know. So I started to inquire and I started to break open my belief systems. And then there's this, can I rest in the open question? You know, can I rest without shutting down in rightness, which I'm calling like fundamentalism. And I think Buddhism, that's what the Buddha Dharma is pointing at. You know, this idea of emptiness and dependent origination is to, you know, it's not groundlessness like, oh, now you're just on your own. Like Trungpa Rinpoche has this great quote. He says, the bad news is you're falling through the air, no parachute. But the good news is there's no ground. So we tend to think in terms of it either exists or it doesn't exist. And the Buddha was saying that those are the two extremes of eternalism and nihilism. So the Buddha is trying to get us to step outside this whole system of those two extremes. So he's saying, there's a beautiful quote by the Buddha in the sutras. He said, and I hope I'm getting it right, the belief, that things exist is one extreme. That they do not exist is another. But I, the Tathagata, don't accept is or is not. And I rest in the middle way. Something like that. The middle way doesn't mean a little bit of eternalism and a little bit of nihilism, or a little bit of belief and a little bit of doubt. It means this is not a system that is actually in accord with reality. Let's step out of that system. Could it possibly be that things like exist and non-exist are like separate? But here, you can't say, for example, things are one or two, because they're leaning. You can't say something doesn't exist because we see it arise. That things are working, they're happening. Like you couldn't stop the nature of, you know, experience and expression and the world of appearance if you tried. It's part of the nature. And yet when you look for a singular, permanent, independent thing, you'll never find one. So things do not, you can't find something that exists, but you can't say it doesn't exist either. So that's what the Buddha is saying in that spectacular. I wish I remembered exactly how it was translated because it always makes my hair stand up on end. So I love that so much.